So, getting started, obviously, this is about conducting an effective performance appraisal. And really the purpose of the performance appraisal, and let me move on in my form here. There we go. So, to identify what the importance and the benefits of doing appraisals are, I know they're not everybody's favorite thing. If they are, we probably need to have you examined a little bit. Because I know that they're time consuming. They do take time if you're going to put any effort into them whatsoever. So to prepare the documentation, to kind of review the year and find what you need to do it, to think about their goals for the next year, and to kind of sit down and have that session with them where it's going to be the most effective timing for them and for you to have a good conversation. And then to conduct fair and beneficial appraisals and to avoid any discrimination charges, of course. So why appraisals are important? They recognize the employee's accomplishments. You know, everybody wants to hear that they're doing well, and hopefully they're hearing it more than just once a year. But everybody wants to hear it. It's to help guide their progress. You know, in being a manager, you're also a mentor. So you're helping guide their professional life as well, to improve their performance. And that's even if they're doing okay. You want to look to improve their performance. You're going to review the year with them and set goals for the next year. And again, identify any areas that they have for improvement and any next steps for them. So if they're now a cardiovascular sonographer and maybe they want to be a cardiac sonographer, you can talk through, you know, how do I get there? What do I need to do? How can you help me? How can I help you? To have that discussion. So the benefits for the organization are, first of all, you're documenting performance. That is always very important. You're helping develop the employee. You're providing them feedback because, again, this should not just be coming once a year, but this is documented feedback that you're giving them on their performance. It also provides legal protection for the organization, and hopefully the review session is a motivation for them. It's a good talk, it's a good discussion, and they feel positive going into the next year. So the benefits for the employee, because employees are not going to learn through osmosis, is it provides them direction, again, feedback, gives them your input, and motivates them for the next year. So discrimination, you'd think, oh, well, how does that even tie in? There are several acts to where employees have sued based on reviews, and they kind of all fall into these 6 areas here. So you've got the Title VII of the Civil Rights Act, which, you know, we're all familiar with. It prohibits employment discrimination, including race, religion, national origin, and sex. You've got age discrimination against anybody 40 and older is protected by this act. You've got Americans with Disabilities Act, and of course that's for individuals with disabilities. And that doesn't mean that you're in a wheelchair anymore. That could mean just about anything. So if you do have employees that are having issues because they're having mental issues, maybe they're having issues because they're getting older, you know, maybe they just have a hand issue or something simple like that. It's not the disability that you'd think of historically. So we need to talk through those if you do have any of those. So just be aware of that. Pregnancy Discrimination Act, again, sorry guys, this does not apply to you, but prohibits discrimination against pregnant employees or those who may even become pregnant, okay? Who may become pregnant. The Equal Pay Act prohibits discriminatory practices related to performance appraisal. So this one obviously is very specific to this. And this came about back in the 50s, 60s, men versus women and the differential in pay. And then you've got the most recent kind of interesting legal act, which is the Lilly Ledbetter Fair Pay Act. I don't know if you've all heard of this one or not. But what it does is it extends deadlines for people to file discrimination claims under the above acts. And basically every time that they receive a paycheck where that pay was based on a discriminatory act or for a discriminatory reason, that renews their deadline. So it updates their deadline. So if they have another 180 days or whatever to file it, whatever it's based on with that act. So it just kind of renews it and keeps it going. So it's regardless how long ago that decision occurred. It could have occurred 20 years ago. They're going to go back and look at that because every paycheck since then has renewed their filing deadline. So, and going back to that page, we all have thoughts about our employees and we all go, oh, they'd never do that. They'd never file that. They'd never do that. They're good people. And I'm just going to forewarn you, and there's a couple managers on this call that could probably attest to this. Employees are getting, and I'm not calling them smarter because, they're knowing it and using these things wisely. I'm saying smarter because they're using it to their advantage, either to wreak havoc with you, or they're using it to prolong the inevitable because they know that they're doing a bad job, but they're using one of these acts to kind of prolong, I guess, your anguish and keep their job. But employees are using these acts more and more, whether it's justified or not. And so that's where you really have to protect yourself and think through it and talk through it with others. So the problems come in when we, first of all, fail to communicate standards. We haven't given them, this is the bar, this is where you need to get to, this is, you're not making it. We let things go on. We fail to give any sort of timely feedback. We think, oh, well, they'll change, or I really want them to like me. I don't want to make anybody angry, or I don't want to make anybody uncomfortable in the office. So I know that it's going to anger them, so I'm not going to tell them. And we're just going to let it go on. It just makes it worse for everybody because essentially you're telling that employee what you're doing is okay. You're meeting expectations. I'm not going to talk to you, so you're doing good, which a lot of times is not the case. It doesn't allow them the opportunity to correct their performance. And that's a lot of times where we fail. We need to not wait until the straw broke the camel's back. You've heard me say that a lot. And allow them to try and correct their performance before it gets to that point. Inconsistency in measuring performance. You've got two similarly situated individuals, but you're not measuring them equally because of some bias that you may have. And then failure to document performance objectively. When you're doing a review, you are to be kind of at personal Switzerland, okay? Take out your personal feelings about that individual, whether you don't like their hair color or, they have some sort of characteristic in their personality that you don't like. You need to be objective. You need to be a personal Switzerland. Base it on their performance, not on your personal feelings about them. And then failure to address issues before they become insurmountable. That goes back to just kind of letting it go on. And, it damages their relationships. It damages what people think about them. And a lot of times it's just hard to come back from. If, for example, you were doing a bad job as a manager and we let it go on and on and on and your employees hated you, there's a point where there's no turning back. It just is what it is, and for you to turn that around is almost impossible. And so we need to be timely in that feedback, allow them to correct it, and get to them before those issues do become just overwhelming. So appraisal forms, of course, these define what the expectations are. It has the measurement tools on them. We use a 1-to-5 ratio. There is a general guideline sheet in ADP, what's a 1, what's a 3, what's a 5 that you can use. And it's, again, a guideline. The rating system 1-to-5 provides specific examples in there. And we'll go through this in just a little bit, but don't be so broad that they don't even know what you're talking about. And then set measurable goals. And we'll talk about what those are here in just a moment. So to measure performance, you need to be specific. Again, not broad, fair, neutral Switzerland, consistent with others, and clear in what you're saying, and it needs to be useful. Okay, if it doesn't apply to them, or it's too broad, it's not going to be helpful to them at all. So think back to the best performance review that you've got, the one that helped you the most, and kind of use that in your toolbox to help them and help you in creating the reviews. So, sorry, I have blacked out names to protect the innocent. These are actual examples. This is probably our biggest challenge with reviews, is that two things. The comments do not match the rating, or the rating doesn't match the performance. So these are two examples where the comments really don't match the rating. So we've got technical knowledge here rated at a 4. And this individual utilizes the available resources to complete daily tasks. Isn't that what we expect of that employee? I would expect them to utilize resources to complete their daily tasks. I don't think that that's a 4. 4, again, she frequently has to repeat or redo completed work. Okay, infrequently means that she's had to at some point. I mean, we do expect that there will be errors. That's just life. But is that really a 4? Again, communication, 4. Communicates well with physician staffs, patients, and hospital representatives. Isn't that something that we expect them to do? So again, how is that a 4? These comments are not matching the rating. And there's the challenge, because at some point, this employee may have an issue and we're going to go back and look and go 4, 4, 4, but the comments aren't matching. They're not supporting it all. So you will find more of these kind of coming back to you to say, okay, this isn't matching up. What is it? How did they get a 4 on quality of work? What is it that they did to get this, above expectations rating? Okay. So the next one, looking at, again, a 4 under quality of work. Spoke with the physicians and they agree blank testing and quality of work is always good. Again, that's kind of an expectation. Customer service, 4. Blank has always been patient-oriented. She makes the patient her first priority and the patients appreciate that. Again, not matching up. The challenge with the rating not matching the performance itself is that, first of all, when you actually do get to a point where you're giving honest reviews and you're like, well, that's a 3. They're doing good, and 3 is not bad. A lot of employees have in their head that 3 is bad. 3 is good. You're meeting expectations. You're doing well. 3s are good. But when you go back and you start to give honest reviews and you've given 4s and 5s often, it's going to be a difficult conversation because they're going to think that they're doing way worse than what they've historically done. And I encourage you all to transition that way, to give honest reviews. Because, for example, we had an employee recently that we had to give corrective action on. And I looked back at the reviews, and even though this manager acknowledged she's got some behavioral issues, she doesn't communicate well, grumpy, puts qualifiers on anything that's asked her to do. Well, if I do this, then I'm not going to do this. Okay, that's not good. But I look back at her review and it said she was awesome, star performer, communicates well, and that was just 6 months ago. Okay, those things aren't matching up. To say always had these issues, but the reviews say something different is an issue, because if it comes down to this employee then sues based on one of those acts that we saw before, they're going to pull those reviews and they're going to go, well, why did you term them? They were stellar. You said right here they're stellar. they're going to ask those questions. So it does document their performance. So be careful when you're doing that. So in documenting performance, again, you'll see be objective listed here a lot. Include all employees in this. This isn't just for full-time employees. Your PRN need feedback. Your part-time need feedback. Everybody should get feedback. Provide complete and accurate information. Document regularly. I sometimes can't even remember yesterday, let alone 365 days of one of my 5 employees' performances. So just make sure that you're keeping track of everything. And that doesn't mean just the bad or just the really, really good. Just sit down and say, okay, did well this month, no issues, whatever it may be, but just document regularly. And to set goals, I'm sure you might have heard of SMART goals before. We'll talk about what those are in just a second. But it's based on their job requirements, so it's not anything that's not listed there or anything that's kind of above and beyond. But SMART goals are specific, they're measurable, they're achievable, they're realistic, and they're time-based. Okay, so a SMART goal example is such. So for specific, an example of a no would be server availability greater than 99%. A better way to say that is availability of productive internet service is greater than 99%, because server availability, different kinds of servers, you're being more specific there. Measurable, can do presentations in Spanish. Okay, the better way to say it is completes 2 presentations in Spanish for an audience of no less than 15 people. Because the measurable piece over there can do presentations in Spanish. Okay, so they can speak Spanish, they could probably do a presentation, they know PowerPoint. Great. The employee now knows they've got to do 2 presentations, and they can't just sit down in front of Bob and do a presentation. They know that they've got to do presentations for more than 15 people. So it's very specific, it's easy to measure. So, and achievable. Under achievable, 0 stolen PCs. Okay, that's not even in, assuming this is an IT person, this isn't even in their realm. I mean, from a standpoint of they can't control every PC, and lock it down and handcuff it to somebody's arm. That's not going to happen. So a better way to say it is users are informed twice a year about measures required to avoid thefts. Okay, that puts whatever they can do in their control and tells them exactly what they need to do. Realistic is on time every day. Okay, nobody's going to be on time every day. That's just unrealistic, obviously. So is on time 19 of 20 work days. Okay, that's again measurable, it's specific, should be achievable. Time-based, hold staff meetings. Again, too broad. Hold staff meetings no less than once a month for all staff for purposes of education and information. Okay, so it meets those qualifications. The employee knows what they're supposed to do. You've told them exactly what they need to do. It's easy to measure. Hold on, it's not letting me move on. Just a second. Okay, so employees' input, that's why we have them do the self-evaluations, and sometimes we let them hold the process hostage, and so we'll talk about that in a minute. We're not going to allow them to do that. But what they need to help with is setting goals. What goals do they want to achieve over the next year? They should give you at least 1 or 2. In designing action plans, sitting down and talking with you, what's the best way to get there, both for their goals and for your goals? What help do they need? Identifying their strengths and their weaknesses. Again, I think this goes somewhat back to goals, to if they're weak in, knowing NextGen, maybe one of their weaknesses or their goals is learning NextGen or taking an extra NextGen class. Providing comments for under and exceeding performance scores. Employees are notorious for rating themselves 5s. Okay, I call that the walk on water score. If they're scoring themselves 4s or 5s, they need to tell you why. They're kind of to remind you, because they remember their performance sometimes better than you do, because you're looking at 15, 20 different people. They're looking at themselves. So make them provide you comments on why they're not achieving it or why they're exceeding. Okay, and make sure that they participate in the appraisal meeting. Make sure it's not just a one-sided conversation. But you should give them ample time to complete their self-evaluation. And if they don't meet that time frame, move on. Okay, it won't take them long to know and to talk amongst themselves that, oh my gosh, I didn't get a chance to even put this in. Some employees may go, yay, I didn't get a chance to put this in. But the thing is they're not giving you, if they want to toot their own horn, they're not doing it. But what they are doing is holding up the process. And I know you all love my late review report that puts you in red if you're late. Okay, don't let them do that to you. Give them 7, 10, 14 days to do it. If they haven't done it, then move on and do it. And then again, it won't take them long to realize that you're going to move on without them because they can't hold that process hostage. Okay, so this is from an old Saturday Night Live skit. So reviews should not be a surprise. They should not, if they're performing badly, again, it should not be a once-a-year conversation. It should not be, surprise, you stink. And don't ding a whole entire section because one little thing went wrong during the year. On the flip side of that, if a big issue has occurred during the year, don't ignore that in their review. Just mention it. If it, is one that does make the score lower, then, note that as long as that doesn't happen again next year, then your score will be back up to meeting expectations, or you would have exceeded, but, we had this huge issue, and so you're just meeting at this point, but as long as it doesn't happen again, we'll be good. But I'd be remiss not to mention it because, again, that's documentation. We go back and we look at that from year to year. So knowing your own personal biases is important. There's, first of all, the recency bias. So the employee either did something really great or really stunk it up in the recent history, and you let that color their entire year of review. Okay, don't let that happen. Really take it in the context of what it is and think of the whole year. There's the halo horn effect, where you ignore that the employee isn't on time and isn't a good member of the team because they're great at something else. You can fill in the blank there. So it's like, well, give them all threes because they really are great at taking scans, and gosh, if I didn't have them, we'd be in a world of hurt. But other employees are watching this employee not arrive on time, come in, leave whenever they want. It's going to create issues for the team. Personal bias, again, neutral Switzerland, your personal Switzerland. Don't let your personal like or dislike of that person color their review, either positively or negatively. And then comparison bias, you allow somebody else's awesome or horrible performance to affect your rating of the employee. So that's where you've got Sam, who really stinks at being a medical assistant, and you've got Selena, Selena's good. If Sam wasn't there, Selena would look okay. But because Sam's there, Selena looks awesome. Okay, you're allowing Sam's performance to color Selena and vice versa. Okay, so in preparation for the review, have the employees complete their self-evaluation, ask any questions you need from a clarity point, think about new goals. Don't just reuse their goals from last year. It's not a lather, rinse, repeat thing. So don't do that. Think about what's really are you trying to accomplish in 2016, both from an organizational perspective, as well as a clinic perspective, as well as a personal for them perspective. Include feedback from others that work with them. So if they work with physicians, get feedback from them. If they work with other staff members or they work under a nurse practitioner, Now you want to be careful with asking their immediate peers for feedback, because sometimes that may not work out well, but certainly physicians, people above them that work with them regularly, you'll want to get their input and kind of incorporate that somehow into their review. Consult with your manager regarding the review content and increases. So don't go all renegade and go, oh, this employee's great, da 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 da, and 4% increase. And then you go and often you talk to the employee and you're like, 4% increase and you're wonderful. And then your manager gets it and they're like, no, we've talked about this employee a couple times and the budget is this, or you've already done this for that person, because you're going to look foolish going back to that employee going, I had to change it. Okay, so consult with your manager first before you talk to the employee. Prepare, I cannot speak today, a professional review. And that means keep the conversational stuff out of the review. Just make it facts, keep it brief and to the point, easy to read, and again, provide examples. And schedule an appropriate time and place. If they work in a cubicle, you're not going to come over to their cubicle and go, okay, let's do your review. Really think about what's the best time of day for you and for them to have the best conversation. Where is that location going to be? And it doesn't have to be an hour-long conversation with each, but give them the time of day. Okay. And then this was an interesting, let me see if I can get this to come up. This was a LinkedIn article that came out. I don't know if any of you saw it. It's called, What Do You Mean I'm Defiant? So it's talking about using very broad words to describe somebody without getting specific and without providing those examples. And so it's kind of a good article. I am recording here, so you'll be able to go out and look at it. And afterwards, I can also send this link out so you can look at it. But so she uses the example. So let's say you have an employee, Thor, who has a problem getting to work on time. During his performance appraisal, you tell him he's always late. He says, I am not. Okay. You're just going to incite argument there because you're saying you're always late. First of all, you use that always word. If any of you have ever been to any marriage seminars, you know you never use the word never and you never use the word always. Same with employees. He'll say, if you check my time card, you'll see I clocked in every day on time this week, except for yesterday when I got stuck in traffic. Okay, so all you've done is you made Thor and his massive hammer angry. So instead, take the timesheets, have examples, have a report there. Look, I've got your timesheets. You were late this many times. That's specific. It's not broad. It's not labeling. It's just the facts. Okay, so that's kind of a good article to look at. It was kind of funny. She brought up Thor. So to start the meeting, lay out the agenda. We're going to go over your review, and afterwards, if you have the money numbers, we're going to talk about money at that point. It's not a one-sided conversation. Encourage their feedback and their dialogue. However, a review is not a negotiation at that point. It's not you're going to go back and change anything. They've given their input. You've given your input. You've reviewed it with your manager. It's not a negotiation. So don't allow them to go back and force you to change things or feel that you have to change things. Okay, you're going to keep it professional. And typically you want to give the good news first. You're really doing well in this, this, and this, because it makes the not so good news a little easier to take. You're doing great in these 5 areas. The one area that I think where you can improve on is XYZ. Give objective examples, keep them neutral, and again, invite them to participate in that review session. Listen actively. Really listen to them. It's not just, respond, okay, I hear you, I see, I remember that. Just a few words can let them know that you're actually paying attention. And it's not a them, us situation, it's a we. How can we get you there? How can I help you do that? What is your part going to be in it? Create the we mentality. So you're going to review their performance, and it's going to be based on their previous goals and, of course, on their duties in their job. You note their strengths and their accomplishments and identify any areas for improvement. So the goals that you set are going to be based on the organization's goals, including your clinic goals, and then also on areas that need improvement, as well as their own personal goals, and personal meaning within the workplace. So when you end the meeting, encourage their good performance. Say thank you. Tell them they're doing a good job. Again, if they're really, really horrible, we should have been talking before. That shouldn't be a surprise to them. But again, thank them. Lay out the action plan. Okay, so in 90 days, we're going to meet again to go over whatever goal that you had. Whatever you guys decided, lay out an action plan for that. Communicate the outcome of goals not met. Okay, you didn't take those classes for Excel that I asked you to take back in 2015. That is why you got that lower score. So it's on there for your 2016 goal. So I do expect that those will be done within the next 90 days. So you're being specific, you're telling them. And again, if you've got money, then you talk about money at that point, and then confirm understanding. So are you good with that action plan? We're going to move forward, blah, blah, blah. So I'm going to take a minute and unmute you all here. So you may want to mute yourselves on your end. Sorry, I've got to unmute you one by one. Okay, so go ahead and mute yourself on your end. Okay, so the questions are, is this acceptable, yes or no? So just chime in when you know the answer. Well, if I can get it to come up. Hold on. So an employee comes to an appraisal meeting without having identified whether past performance goals have been met. Is that acceptable or unacceptable? Unacceptable.
Unacceptable. Unacceptable.
Yes, thank you. Don't make me do my Bueller bit. Okay, the employee comes to an appraisal meeting with a goal for the next period that you don't agree with. Is that acceptable or unacceptable?
Acceptable. Yes, that's their opinion. Oh,
yeah, that's acceptable. That is their opinion. It doesn't mean that you gotta go with it. Okay, you have an appraisal meeting with an employee without having completed your written appraisal of the employee.
Unacceptable.
Right.
Unacceptable.
Yep. Correct. And the employee fails to complete their self-evaluation by your reasonable deadline, and you wait for their response before proceeding.
Unacceptable.
Right.
Unacceptable.
That's acceptable.
Don't let them hold the process hostage. Okay? So during an appraisal meeting, you try to listen intently to what the employee is saying. This one's a gimme.
Acceptable.
Yep.
Acceptable.
Okay. You professionally notify an employee during an appraisal meeting that his or her performance is not up to par and that it must improve soon. Is that
That's acceptable.
acceptable or unacceptable?
That's acceptable.
Actually, you need to be more specific.
Yes.
It's acceptable to say your performance is not up to par, but it's better to say, look, if I don't see an improvement in the next 3 weeks, then I'm going to move on to corrective action. So the soon is the word that kind of made that one more unacceptable than acceptable. So key points to remember is to be timely. I know nobody wants to see their name highlighted in red. Be professional in your review and be reasonable. Think about how you'd like to be reviewed. So are there any questions? again. Everybody knows everything about reviews. Yay! I did a good job. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys. Have a good day.
Thank you. Thank you.